Islam is a minority religion in South Africa, with Muslims numbering about 700,000 in a population of 48 million. Around 90% of Muslims are Indian and Malay in origin. Indians are mostly the descendants of indentured and trader immigrants who arrived from the Indian subcontinent from 1860, whilst the ancestors of Malays were slaves imported from South and Southeast Asia from the 17th century. Around 10% of Muslims are black and a small percentage are white. Indian Muslims are generally concentrated in KwaZulu-Natal, Gauteng and the Mpumalanga provinces of South Africa, whilst Malay Muslims live mainly in the Cape provinces. Many Indian Muslims are heavily influenced by Indo-Pak schools of thought and strictly adhere to them. But there are others who, with the advancement of the internet and other forms of exposure to overseas Muslim communities and scholars, question this adherence and are open to learning about and practicing on other viewpoints.
You know, being a white Muslim woman in South Africa is very, very challenging, and some days are easier than others. And I definitely think that those first, what we as reverts like to call the honeymoon phase, it's easier. You have such a strong faith, and you're ready to take on the world with all its challenges.
Whilst the issue of renegotiating one's identity as a Muslim may hold truer for people in America and Europe, in South Africa we have a very privileged position in the sense that for us it has been an issue of reaffirming our identity.
As an African Muslim, you don't much feel welcome within either Indian or Malay community as a Muslim. There's always this label that you seem to get, that you need to realize and understand that you are not of our community.
We're the new generation of Indians or Indian Muslims in South Africa. The first generation Indians always consider themselves Indians and that they've come from India. But we've acclimatized to the country and we think this is our home now. So obviously our identities, our understanding of identity has changed. We consider ourselves South African.
It's hard to understand where do you fit in as a South African, okay? Because South Africa has Africans, it has Indians, it's got Malays, it's got coloreds, mixed race, as Trevor Noah said. But you know, it has such a variety. But if you go to like Turkey, you can only get Turkish people, for instance. You know, so it does have a very difficult place to put yourself in.
We're becoming increasingly polarized, and one section of the community feels they're better than the other, or they're more right than the other, and we're speaking over each other. And when people outside of Islam look at us, well, they only see Muslim. They don't see these labels.
When I use technology, whether it is the internet or even if I'm watching videos, because these days we have access to so many television stations, satellite television stations. We never had that before. So with me, I get to identify with Muslim youth around the world, in North America, in Europe, to use this horrible concept, the West. And I think I tend to identify with Muslims in these countries.
For the last 20 years, what was important for the young generation and people settling down in the West is to be able to say, okay, now what we need to know is what is Islamic, what are the Islamic principles that we have to be faithful to, and what is coming from our cultures of origin. So it's something which is much deeper than only the perception from outside.
I think being comfortable about an interpretation of Islam requires a lot of introspection, firstly, and part of that introspection requires admitting that there are certain things that certain times you will find something and perhaps you may not like it, but that's the truth and you need to accept it. That's the first step, because you can't only search to find something that suits you, you need to search for the truth, and sometimes the truth might be difficult to accept.
I think us as South African Muslims, we're very, very fortunate. We don't have challenges of Islamophobia, for example. We don't have challenges where freedom of our religion being practiced is at risk. Whereas if you go to America, you go to these places, you know, they are really at odds with, especially young people, with whether they can be British, for example, and be Muslim at the same time. And, you know, they face with so many challenges being a Muslim.
The question that now we have, you know, the generation that comes after 300 years of Muslims settling in South Africa means that it is about time, and particularly post the apartheid era, in which now we're talking about a new generation, a new South Africa, a new future and the such. I think it's right not only for South African Muslims. I think, you know, all of South Africa now, all its facets, all its tribes, all its you know, people, all the sectors that make up what is South Africa, I think it is right and true for everyone to go on that soul-searching mission, so that the future can be shaped according to the collective endeavors of everyone.
It's a Saturday morning in Cape Town, and these young Muslim women are making their way into a coffee shop. But far from fashion, movies and men, the discussion around the table is centered on a subject growing in importance among South African Muslims in a post-apartheid context.
Personally, I feel very lucky that I found Islam in Cape Town, because of all the places in South Africa, this is like the most, almost like liberal Islamic society. And I think that experiencing Islam as a sort of a Malay thing, it was far more, it was very positive, because I think that well, from my experience, and I know this sounds very judgmental, but they come across as a lot more religious and a lot more spiritual, and being able to have an experience in a mosque was extremely important to me, and it's ultimately was the Malay people who made me fall in love with Islam. So from when I first started like interacting with Indian people, that's when my disillusionment started coming around, because like I didn't understand where all this superiority complex was coming from, and it was their roots.
And for you, Khadija, I mean, like we're sitting around here, we've all said what you said, we're converts. What about you? I'm assuming, you grew up, you were born into a Muslim family, an Indian family, you were born Muslim, and that was your lifestyle, you were taught to pray and everything else. How would you define your experience? You're in the same age group as us. Does our experience sound familiar to you, or?
Even though I was born as an Indian Muslim, I didn't grow up in a typically Indian community.
Are you an Indian Muslim or a Muslim Indian?
Muslim. Well, funny thing is, I think I first identify myself as being Muslim because being a Muslim is who I am. It gives me meaning in my life. I focus my life around being Muslim. Like recently, I've left my job to do Islamic studies, and I feel like I haven't been able to give enough back to the community, because that's what being Muslim is about. And after secondary to that, I think I'm South African. To me, being South African is more important, and is more important than being Indian.
Like Khatija, many young Muslim South Africans are still grappling with the issue of identity, considering Islam spread into South Africa over 300 years ago.
Being a South African youth, I mean, I'm Muslim, I'm South African, I'm also of Indian extract. So I've got all that coming in, and I also like to think I'm cosmopolitan. So it's a bit of a mix, or masala, so to say. And I think for us especially, we're just trying to find our own identity. Not really hold on to the past, but look at the past, learn from the past, but carve our own way.
I think a lot of young South Africans are now third or fourth generation Indians. So they do not feel that they're that Indian as compared to, say, their first generation Indians. Things are changing now. We feel South African, we're not Indian. We support South Africa, we don't support India in cricket. So that's why I think the whole renegotiating thing is starting now as the new generations come in. We've acclimatized to South Africa, this is our home now.
What is the purpose of knowing your lineage and where you come from? مَا تَصِلُوا بِهِ أَرْحَامُكُمْ. That is a way for you to link up with those that you come from, to know that so-and-so is my great-grandfather.
Many of us would take Shahada, for example, under Indian Muslims or under Malay Muslims. And so we were obviously pulled, we didn't know any better. We didn't know any better. But as time went on, as you were growing into Islam, you still felt, somewhat, isolated. There were, for example, things you would come into a gathering and there would be, for example, a totally Malay-style gathering, and you were not Malay. A totally Indian-style gathering, and you were not Indian. And so you, within your own thoughts, began to really think deeply about, who are you within, Islam? And so those thoughts sort of brought about necessitated a change that they had to occur.
As somebody that's come into the religion, you struggle with where you stand in all of this. Do you just take on the religion? Do you take on the culture as well? And who are you now? Or do you keep your own culture? I mean, can you be, for example, an Afrikaans Israeli Muslim because I'm half Afrikaans, half Israeli. Can that work together? Can it thrive in the same environment? And often it can't.
I'm a fourth generation immigrant. I've never been to India. I don't have any association with being Indian, perhaps beyond my skin color. So I think it is a universal experience for many young Muslim South Africans today, is to try to work out what it means to be a Muslim South African.
But whilst this renegotiation of identity is a relatively new phenomenon within the South African context, Muslims in other parts of the world have been grappling with it for a longer period of time.
This issue in the West, in Canada, in the States, as well as in Europe, is a very old situation that we have, at least over the last 30 years. We have been talking about how we are dealing with the surrounding culture, with the European cultures, the American culture, and to try to get a sense of what are the priorities and in which way we have to marry and to get this understanding about the Islamic principles and the cultural identity. For years, what we got as what it is to be a Muslim meant to be following a tradition. And this tradition is coming from somewhere. It's coming from sometimes the countries of origin, of a very far origin, because we're not talking about integration for South African Muslims. We are talking about the presence which have been, for centuries. But still, it's connected to Pakistan, it's connected to India. As to the Islamic universe of reference is coming from Asia and from India and from Pakistan. So I would say here that there is this connection, and then the young generation, they are in between this and that, meaning these traditions that are kept by some scholars, by some organizations that have been working on the ground, and they are also listening to some Muslims living in the West saying that we are Western Muslims, Western by culture, Muslim by religion, and they are coping and they are listening to discourses coming from the West, which gives them a completely different perspective about Islam. I say, okay, we had that, and now how are we going to deal with this?
For me, it's a discriminatory law. This exposure to the research works and experiences of international or Western theologians and scholars are helping to empower young Muslim South Africans with the knowledge of how to deal with their own conflicting identities within a secular society like South Africa. But as they assert their religious identity over other forms of social identity, will Islam or their nationality become the base of their personal identification? Muslims the world over follow the Quran and the teachings of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, in their everyday lives, turning to Islamic scholars or ulama who help them understand these religious texts. Many South African ulama, particularly those based in KwaZulu-Natal and Gauteng, receive their training at religious seminaries which are heavily Indo-Pak in their ideological stance. Muslims who are grappling with the issue of identity in these provinces therefore find it difficult to relate to many of their teachings.
Islam in South Africa is very conservative at the end of the day. Like if you look at our ulama, for example, they're so, and I say this with no disrespect to them because they're very learned men, but that's just the point,
And they're men, you just said men.
Exactly. They're men, and I feel that I'm very for women empowerment and liberation, and I think that the ulama in South Africa are not doing much to promote that.
A lot of the ulama do not know how to address the youth. So it's, you have a really cool PowerPoint presentation in the masjid and you think that's enough. You throw in a few keywords and mix it, this and that, and you think that's enough to actually entice the youth. So I wouldn't want to make a general sweeping statement about the ulama, but I think a lot of ulama do have difficulty in terms of engaging with the youth.
There is a gap. The answers that they got from the traditionalist approaches are not helping them to cope with the reality. They are not fitting in the picture and say, oh, there is something which is not, I don't feel good. So there is something which is not feeling good, not feeling that you are in the society. And it's as if you get the rules from the scholars and you get your life, and there is a contradiction in terms between the two things.
The word Islam means that if any person fully submits himself or herself.
In some parts of the Muslim community, conservative schools of thought have dominated the ideological spectrum. But with the advent of technology and increased exposure to international scholars, this is fast changing.
The one that inspired me the most was Yusuf Estes, who is a Texan convert to Islam. He's got a nice humoristic way of telling his stories.
Well, recently it would be Tariq Ramadan. He's been really inspirational with these ideas. It's revolutionized the way that I look at Islam.
For me, one of the most inspirational scholars is Sheikh Hamza Yusuf.
My greatest inspiration has come from the overseas scholars, Sheikh Hamza Yusuf, Yasser Qadi, Tariq Ramadan, Sheikh Yahya Rhodes, Abdul Hakim Quick.
I have a lot of respect for Professor Tariq Ramadan, for Sheikh Ahmed Kutti as well. He's from North America.
It's a matter of identification again with what he speaks about, what he writes about.
Often our scholars, born Muslims, can be very serious. So it's to add a little bit of humor on some of the challenges that you face as a revert as well, can really just take the edge off on how bogged down you might feel by everything that you need to learn and all the challenges that you're dealing with.
But they're different. These overseas scholars have such a unique approach, but not only that, they teach Islam, the Islam of love. You know, the local flavor is an Islam of wrath and of anger and of punishment and of fear.
We're living in a very global community, so literature is very available. Nothing is exclusive. You can access a scholar in Medina if you want to. You can access a scholar in the UK if you want to, in Canada if you want to. So I'm glad it's, you know, and I'm reading and I'm absolutely loving it.
She becomes pregnant by means of the Creator.
But pushed by their context, some South African ulama have recognized the need to modify their approach in an effort to become more relevant.
Jesus had no father and a mother. Puts him in an elevated status.
I think that more and more of the ulama today are those who, by virtue of their studies, by virtue of the context within which they gain their ilm, they are more in touch with what we call the real world. I don't like that expression, but I think it's an expression that is understood. Meaning that you understand not only what's going on, but you understand why it's going on, and you understand what the problems are that occur as a result of what's going on.
There are quite a few ulama bodies who actually try and take the initiative to have youth programs which aren't patronizing and preachy, and I think that's a big issue.
I think increasingly in South Africa, our local ulama are beginning to understand that there is a need for them to become relevant to their communities. That ulama cannot exist in towers. You know, they've got to be in among the community, understanding what is going on.
Hafiz Fuzail Sufi, the Imam of the Westville Sufi Mosque, has recognized the need for the ulama to be more in tune with contemporary issues facing Muslims, and therefore enjoys growing popularity amongst the youth.
I went for a khutbah at his masjid because he's the Imam of a masjid in Durban. And what I appreciated and what I really loved about his khutbah is that whereas everybody else was talking about how you're going to go to hell if you don't perform your wudu properly, he was speaking about the recession, he was speaking about racism, he was speaking about issues that I can relate to now. How do these current events affect us as Muslims? Why should we vote? Why should we participate in political events, in cultural events, in social events? So I think I really admired him for that. And using his pulpit basically as a platform to allow Muslims to grow in South Africa, I think we've become quite stagnant.
Osama bin Laden was originally from his family was originally from Yemen, right? And they became a powerful family because of the association with the honest.
We have to look at the importance of the pulpit itself in spreading a message and presenting a message, especially to the modern youth out there. The speaker, the spiritual leadership and the religious leadership needs to embrace firstly modern technology. Secondly, they have to get into a mindset which is a prophetic mindset. The Holy Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, used to speak on a Friday in particular. His sermon used to range from the environmental regarding issues of drought in the city of Medina to the celestial, which means he brought the issues of the day to the pulpit and he addressed the issues from the pulpit. If we go back to this prophetic tradition and give it a modern perspective and utilizing the modern technology and discussing the relevant issues, it will enable us as religious as well as spiritual leadership to shape the identity of the Muslims and the young Muslims in particular and guide them towards a more global Muslim identity, which is the need of the day.
The The issue of modern technology has always been a contentious one within the Muslim community, with some holding it to be impermissible and others advocating its usage to further the cause of Islam and propagate good.
I think with the modern technology, it's something which is really difficult because it's very attractive and you are very quick to go to things that are not ethical. But you can gain lots of knowledge in other experiences. So instead of going just to watch, songs and things that are really clearly not helping us to have a dignified culture and arts for today on YouTube and other things, it's to be selective and to go for all these experiences that we have around the world that are on internet and that we can get knowledge, understanding and be more creative. So this black and white attitude towards modern technology, it's wrong. It's what we need once again is selective approach and using everything which is this global experience and specific experiences around the world to be able to bring what is useful for us here in South Africa, for example, and to implement the better.
The new media is definitely very important to the developing Muslim and in the context that we are in, and I'm convinced about the fact that the older scholars or the more patriarchal scholars actually were afraid of this development because it would expose them. You would expose them in the fact that we would get access to knowledge that was before restricted only to the text of which they had access, and now we have access to different texts, different opinions, different scholars, and in a kind of sense it's almost as if a fear of losing power. To me it seems like that. It's these the older guys, if I may call them that, it's almost as if they're afraid to lose power, and that's why they didn't want us. But the new media, technology, internet, Facebook, the forums, Twitter, all of that is very essential to the development of a Muslim, and it is helping. It's bringing back that spirituality and it's giving a sense of trust and confidence which many young Muslims were beginning to lose.
Well, I was really using a blog for the blog's sake, to write about my experiences or my opinions. I soon established a blog called Makutano, which is Swahili for a place of convergence, because my experience with the Ugandan editor was fascinating. We ended up talking about politics, about social issues, and I realized that we lacked opportunities as Africans to speak to each other about what's going on in each other's countries. And I then was exposed to this fascinating group of young Muslim bloggers in South Africa who, in my opinion, are some of the best young writers in this country. So through them, through interacting with them, I then began writing more and more.
I like looking at Muslim humor, but using Muslim humor as a way to educate people. So I have this idea, or at least what I'm trying to do with the blog, is to not really promote tolerance. I don't really like the word tolerance, but respect. So to respect other people's opinions, to respect the fundamentals of Islam, but maybe have some fun with the cultural aspects that aren't necessarily Islamic in essence, they're just culture.
MJ takes precautions to ensure he doesn't cross the line in his blog posts, asking an Islamic scholar to go over content he is unsure about, but he has still found himself being criticized in more conservative circles.
Recently I got into trouble for a blog I wrote about the World Cup, and a lot of the ulama were talking about the World Cup and how the World Cup is haram, and on the other hand I would go to the matches and I would see Muslims at the matches, and for me that's a bit confusing. On one hand it's haram, and the moment something is haram it's you can't touch it. On the other hand, I had the sense of, okay, this is a great moment for us as South Africans, this is a great moment for unity, this is just a wonderful experience to be a part of. So I spoke about the World Cup and we gave some ludicrous examples of why the World Cup could be haram. And because of that, some of the ulama took offense to it, and I've got a fatwa against me. It wasn't too bad, it was a lot of fun. My mum framed it.
Most Muslims in South Africa are Indian or Malay in origin, but the face of Islam in the country is slowly changing as more and more whites and blacks adopt the faith as their own.
White Muslims or white people are intrigued by Islam. Non-Muslims are intrigued by Islam just because of how clean and different it is from their current lifestyle. It seems that certainly from the reverts that I have encountered, we generally do seem to come from quite maybe a rough background where you've lived quite a lot of partying, a lot of maybe things that you're not so proud of, and generally it seems that you've come to a point where that's not the life for you anymore and you really want something better, and Islam is that answer.
Some of the main reasons why blacks are coming to Islam, maybe I need to mention before that those blacks who are coming to Islam are mostly youth. And I think one of the main reasons why the youth are coming into Islam is because Islam seems to have this acceptance toward youth and some of their issues that they may baggage that they may come with. In other words, youth come from very difficult backgrounds, most of them, and come from very sort of criminal communities or surroundings. And so within Islam, there is this concept of forgiveness. There is this concept of, repentance. There is this concept of the fact that a person can change. And because of that, we're seeing larger numbers of youth coming forward and accepting Islam.
Converting to Islam is the first step. Then there is the concept of community, which is central to the religion. And within this space, the white Muslim experience seems to be strikingly different from that of the black Muslim.
The Muslim community is very open and warm towards converts. The only thing is that you are kind of put on, especially as a white Muslim, I have found you are put on quite a pedestal. You're a bit of an instant celebrity, specifically in Cape Town anyway, and maybe just because of the work that I've done, it might have seemed that way in terms of being on the radio and being in the media industry. But you kind of become an instant role model to everybody else because it seems like such a strange thing for a white person to become Muslim. And then the longer you're Muslim, you kind of think, really, what is all the fuss about? Why is everyone making such a big deal?
When you accept Islam and take Shahada, the circumstances that you have around you is you most probably will be rejected by your family. And when you're rejected by your family, you expect then for those whom you will be coming to, Muslims of Indian or other Malay origins, would welcome you with warm hands, would you understand, accept you, and you would become part of that society and community. But unfortunately, the situation is not like that. You find that you are on your own, and then I know, for example, 2 or 3 individuals whose Islam is at a pause right now, because they didn't feel welcome, because they felt that what was in the books, what was spoken about in the mimbars is not what is happening on the ground.
One thing that did get to me was I found a lot of the Cape Town Muslim men that would sort of come through the doors of the Discover Islam Center or would come into contact, kind of had a very set opinion that they wanted to marry a white convert to Islam, and that kind of got to me, that why white? Why are we making it a race thing? I understand that everybody says that once you've embraced a religion, there is a certain amount of enthusiasm that comes from a new Muslim that a partner or a spouse might think is good to have as their wife. But why make it a race thing? Why not make it a revert thing?
When you're black and you're in an Indian space, you're kind of viewed as not as an equal. You're very secondary to whatever the Indians are. So, in most cases, they sort of viewed you as they immediately assume that, you are from a poor family. So, on Fridays, they want to bring you clothes, secondhand clothes and everything else. I mean, I did come from a poor background. I did. But the thing is that it wasn't because I had told them, it was because they had automatically assumed that you're black, you're poor. So that was my main challenge. And, it still happens, unfortunately, nowadays, where, you try to get into social circles and not everyone necessarily sees you as an equal. You want to invite people over at your house, but they automatically assume that you're staying at a dangerous township, where there's gunshots all, in every street corner. There's like broken cars, they won't be able to park their cars outside your house and all of that stuff. So it's still those challenges.
And I want to know, what do you think it is about Indian people that makes them so obsessed with their heritage? Like, you don't get any other race in South Africa that is so very much who gets their self-esteem from where they're from in the world, and like who feel such a strong connection with their homeland, or who identifies themselves by their village, or who thinks they're better than other people of the same, you know what I mean? It's so, I don't know, I think it's so unhealthy. And I know like I come from a very like specific point of view, and maybe I'm wrong, but like what do you think, why do you think Indian Muslims do that so much? Why do you, and even though Islam states that there's clearly no place for racism, they still engage with it, without any shame. Why is that? And like, how would you defend that?
I completely agree with you, and that's something that bothers me and saddens me as much as it does you. Because I think it's so unhealthy, as you said, and un-Islamic for Indians to have this superiority complex.
We need to understand that Islam, or rather we need to take ownership of Islam as our own. And we also need to understand that Islam is not dependent on any individual or community. As a matter of fact, we had to make ourselves understand that Islam first and foremost spread into Africa through, for example, the migration to Abyssinia, Ethiopia. And through those sort of understandings, begin then to root ourselves within Islam and understand that we do not have to apologize to anyone. And so we took ownership of Islam, and then we also said that we need to move Islam forward as African Muslims, not necessarily depending on the other races that are available within the South African context.
Hijab refers to the Islamic dress code adopted by Muslim women the world over. The wearing of loose-fitting and non-transparent garments and the covering of the head, neck, arms and legs are meant to uphold modesty, a concept which is central to the Islamic faith. Within the South African context, women in hijab have traditionally shied away from playing a public role, but this is now changing.
My first debut on national television, I went dressed just the way as I am. I never had to question, should I dress any other way? Afterwards, people asked me, did you feel shy dress this way? Did you think you should change? Did it ever and to be honest, the question never entered my mind. I think I'm lucky to be a woman who does not feel the need to morph or to make her Muslim identity more subtle in order to be relevant to a broader South Africa. I think that it is really a mindset that you adopt.
For me, the more women who take on that role, who see no conflict or contradiction between them abiding by the teachings of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and at the same time delivering on their civic responsibilities, I think that's absolutely perfect. And it also goes to show when, one of the greatest misconceptions now targeted towards Islam, not because Islam is guilty of this, but because Muslims are guilty of sometimes, giving the wrong examples, is about oppressing women, and that Islam oppresses women. I say no. Some Muslims oppress women, yes, but Islam doesn't. These examples of women who take on, the attire and the behavior, more importantly, the behavior and the discipline of a Muslim woman, and then deliver on their civic responsibilities in whatever guise and whatever fashion is a magnificent example of how a Muslim should be.
Well, the media has contributed greatly to the way Muslim women are projected, and so I'm grateful for a program like this, where you can actually see that Muslim women are not the oppressed slave kind of people, that we have our own identities. And yes, it would really help if there were more Muslim women in hijab, confident with themselves, of course confident with your deen, with your knowledge, with your understanding of Islam, that you go out there and then you can, our job is not to go out there to preach. You don't have to do that. Just be Muslim and be yourself, and carry yourself with the dignity of this religion, which is amazing. And automatically people then, through your actions, through your behavior, through your speech, they identify everything that's beautiful about Islam. So we really need more Muslims to get into the spirit of Islam and to carry that spirit forward, so that people non-Muslims can really appreciate the value that is in Islam.
But I think it's the good trend. This is exactly what I was saying, is to respond with faithfulness to faithfulness. So some of the scholars and the traditional scholars coming from or getting the knowledge from India and Pakistan and even Arab countries, because it's also coming from Saudi Arabia and Egypt, sometimes they had the impression, or they were pushing, if you wear the headscarf, it means you have to stay at home, because this is the traditional way to speak about the family. Women shouldn't be involved in working in the job market. This is not the place for women. Now what the young generations are now showing is that they are faithful to the headscarf and the Islamic principles, but they are involved in society. They are following in the footsteps of Khadija radiallahu anha as to trade, to Aisha radiallahu anha as to education, Fatima radiallahu anha as to being involved in social work and helping the poor. Salama was also very much aware of all the political discussions, so she was aware of the public sector. This is what should be done. So the new visibility of Muslim women in the civil society, it's a good signal. It's a very positive signal that they are succeeding by respecting the principles and adapting themselves in the name of their autonomy, their rights, and their prerogatives to the South African environment. This is it. This is exactly the way forward.
With regards to women in hijab, particularly from the women alone, I think they have come to realize that hijab is not about only covering their heads, but hijab is about covering their heads but keeping their brains uncovered. And I think the women have become to realize that the hijab is not something which physically demarcates a movement away and a boundary between them and interaction in society. So as much as women are covering up their heads today, they are uncovering their brains as well, and they are making their presence felt, which I think is extremely positive, because we need more women to become more active in affairs of our community, like the early Muslim women of Medina were active in the development and the social, political and ethical and religious development of the early Muslims.
I go and I speak to the American ambassador dressed just the way I am. I've spoken to Michelle Obama dressed just the way I am. And I think it's important for us to realize that in South Africa, at least, nobody's telling you to take off your hijab. Nobody's telling you to take off hijab to be South African. The hijab belongs in South Africa. The hijab is as South African as anything else.
To Allah belongs the universe, so beautiful.
Historically, Muslims have been recognized as playing a significant role in contributing to various art forms like poetry, calligraphy, and architecture. But with the fast-changing global landscape, young Muslims are turning to more contemporary art forms as a means of expressing a contextualized Islamic identity.
Art is putting a piece of yourself, a piece of your soul, your thoughts, your experiences, your hopes, your dreams onto a medium. I chose the medium of songs, but other people choose the medium of art or poetry or writing or speeches. I chose music. And it's putting a piece of your soul and telling people, well, this is who I am.
Islam has never at any given stage impinged on cultural imperatives as well as creative expression. If you look at the mindset of the Arabs, they love their language and they love their poetry in particular. The Holy Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, used to encourage the recitation of poetry and creative expression. So what we see today is actually a continuity of a system which was established and encouraged by the Holy Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. So likewise, we should be encouraging this. And in this day and age when everyone looks at Muslims in a generally negative light, as one comedian put it, we need to put the fun back into fundamentalism.
Shabnam Khan recently launched her debut novel, Onion Tears, joining a growing list of Muslim women who are exploring the medium of fiction writing as a means of expressing identity.
Fiction is actually the one place where people start to listen to your story, because it's not a lecture, it's not something you're speaking directly about. It's a story. It's basically a story, and there's something in the story for you, and you can take that. You can take your own meaning from the story. I can just, as the author, I can just lead someone somewhere, but they can take their own meaning from it. So I definitely think they would sit down and read a story instead of listening to a lecture about someone telling them about why something is good or why something is bad.
Zayn Bika is a well-known figure within the global Islamic music industry. One of the pioneers of the English Islamic song, he began his career creating sounds which appealed to mainly children. But through the years, this has changed, and his latest album even features a cover version of a Michael Jackson song.
There's a place in your heart, and I know.
If you look at my work and if I just look back at all the series that I've done thus far, they're really a catalogue of my life, of the thoughts that I had. When I went for Hajj, I wrote so many amazing songs because I was there and I was experiencing Hajj for the first time as a human being going on this journey for God. When I'm driving around in Johannesburg and I see these kids, it inspires me to write about orphans. So I wrote many songs about orphans, like Orphan Child or My Mom is Amazing, things like that. Without a doubt, it's an evolution of myself as a human being. As I grow older, I realize that yes, it's very important to have songs about Eid and about what we do on special occasions and but it's also important, and I believe that every single song, if it has a good message and it's about humanity and it's about making this world a better place, then it's Islamic.
Inspired by artists like Bika, other Muslim musicians like the Durban-based group Wahid are trying to experiment with a uniquely Muslim South African sound.
We want to promote that we are proudly South African, number one. Muslim first, number one. But the second is that we are South African. And people don't understand South African, so we bring in Zulu, and we bring in Arabic, and we bring in English, and we bring Songul Afrikaans hopefully soon. And that's to show, listen, this is South Africa. We are mixed, but at the end of the day, we come out with one sound.
But being a Muslim musician does not come without its own set of challenges. For starters, every musician has to make a decision as to whether to use musical instruments or not.
In Islam, by and large, if we want to summarize, we have three main positions. One is to say everything is haram, so we have to avoid that. The second one, for example, with music, is to say the voice is okay, the drums are okay, because this was the way it was done at that time, and so we go for that. So no music, and you use your voice, exactly what we do with the Quran, without instruments, or you use drums, and that's it. And you have another opinion, which is now the mainstream opinion. They are coming to the principles, and they try to extract, to derive the principles of what was done. Drums and voice, this was the way they were doing this. But we had 2 or 3 occurrences during the Prophet's life where he was accepting, music and even singers and women. So he was integrating the Ansar culture in the way he was dealing with music itself. And one of the opinions is to say we don't have a problem with music, we don't have a problem with lyrics and drama and all. It depends first on the intention of the artist. Second, the way it's done, is it respecting ethics, and which kind of impact is going to have on people.
However, within the Muslim South African landscape, it is often the most conservative opinion which is actively propagated, which means that artists like Bika and Wahid have to be innovative in trying to appeal to a wider audience.
For me, it was a simple choice, not to say that what I personally believed, but it was more a case that how do I access as many people as possible. I wouldn't want to write a song about mothers or orphans or Allah, and a little child was not able to listen to it because their parents believed in their opinion that musical instruments was haram. So and I respect people really on all sides, whatever their belief is. So I thought, well, let me try to make my songs as widely available as possible. So whenever we do the songs, we make it available just with voice, and then we make a version with drums as well.
Only when I personally myself started understanding music in Islam and melody in Islam did I believe beatboxing was an amazing tool to bridge that gap between people from the conservative aspect to people who believed music was completely haram, which is kind of the extreme, I would say. So we thought, hey, this is a bridging gap. People who don't want the music, people who want the music, they're getting either side.
We also, over the years, especially over the last 3 or 4 years, I've also tried to explore other genres. For example, we might not look at like a very traditional nasheed genre, which is very slow, but we tried to do something different. Like we did the drug-free song with my son Rashid when he was 13, which is more a rap song. And when he turned 13, he had done a lot of previous songs before, but he was a teenager now. And I said, well, what song would you like to do? He says, I want to do a rap song. So I said, well, fine, if that's the language of the youth, we have to try to appeal to them. And that's become, alhamdulillah, very popular. So I think it's trying to cater for as many people as possible, try to keep it appealing, but also keep it relevant to the audience. And I think that is very much in accordance with the prophetic message. The Prophet ﷺ spoke to different people in different ways, but the message was always the same.
The issue of identity is a complex one, particularly within the South African context, where apartheid has forced people into their own enclaves, and later generations of Muslim South Africans will probably grapple with this for years to come.
I wouldn't want anyone to almost shift their identities or to change their identities or to even fall into a mold of identities. I think it's just being happy with yourself that's very important.
In renegotiating your identity, it is important first to find your own identity, to find your own peace, your own inner sense of satisfaction, contentment, and of course confidence. You need to be confident within yourself that what you know, what you're searching for, what you're doing is correct.
Even though I do have some identity crisis and identity issues, with the whole black Muslim thing, Islam is the core for me. When I go to bed, at least I know that, that's one thing I at least identify with.
South African Muslims should understand that this country is theirs, and they are citizens of this country, and as a result, and due to the fact that they also are driven by the tenets of their faith, that they have dues and they have responsibilities. And whilst we're never sluggish in claiming our rights, we must also equally be unsluggish in delivering on our responsibilities.
For the Muslims, it's a very serious matter. They are right to ask about, who am I as a Muslim? How can I be a South African citizen? What are the priorities? And not to be within the society against something which is bad for the society. For example, it was easier for a South African Muslim to be within the society against the apartheid system because this was a common challenge. Exactly the same with Muslims in Muslim majority countries when they were facing colonization. They were united against. Now the Muslim citizens, South African Muslim citizens, they should find their place for something. So to belong to the country and to get a sense of loyalty to this country.
What is a passion of mine is to rather emphasize our sameness as Muslims. And I think the sameness, or rather, one of the universalities of being Muslim starts off with Assalamu alaikum, because no matter what kind of Muslim you are, that is a universal greeting across Muslim cultures, across interpretations of Islam. So I think that's, one of, to go back and to start greeting each other with peace.
We may be culturally diverse. We may have our different tongues and our languages and our clothing. We may be Ethiopian Muslims, we may be Indian Muslims, we may be American Muslims. But in certain instances, all Muslims are the same. And that identity should prevail. That identity is the identity of a Muslim, wherein a Muslim is recognized by the fact that another Muslim is safe regarding his condition from verbal and physical abuse. And a true believer is he from whom all of humanity are safe with regards to their blood and their wealth. If this identity is the identity of a Muslim, regardless of whether he's in Ethiopia, Europe, or America, or South Africa, it will automatically create a positive image of Muslims throughout the world.
If you ask me, why do I stand here so unafraid of everything around me? Proudly I would say, I am a Muslim. If you ask her, why does she dress that way, all covered up, in a world that gives it all away? Proudly she would say, Muslim. دين الإسلام ديني والعرض بغير ديني محمد اللي هديني نور الإيمان. دين الإسلام ديني والعرض بغير ديني محمد اللي هديني نور الإيمان. If you ask me, surely this cannot be. You give your wealth so free, and you say your life is charity. It ain't hard to see. I am a Muslim.